Maps that do not want to be known. I used to believe that maps knew everything. Every road, every village, every place a human foot has trod. This had always been my sole consolation as Salim, a photographer of forgotten stories. I believed that the world, in all its vastness, was recorded, numbered, and indexed somewhere, and that my job was simply to pull those places from the shadow of neglect into the camera's light. But in the winter of 2019, I discovered there are places that maps don't know. Not because they haven't been discovered yet, but because they do not want to be known. This concept alone was enough to demolish everything I had built about life and documentation. My office was a chaotic mix of old newspaper clippings, tattered maps, and neglected communication devices. My work centered on the edges of the country, where forgotten villages, people living on the margin, and stories that everyone was afraid to tell or share resided. I was addicted to the narratives of slow disappearance. And in the midst of my research for a story about an abandoned train station, an email arrived. The message was not in the regular inbox. It was hidden deep in the spam folder, as if it did not want anyone to see it. The subject line was a random series of numbers, and the content was just one line, written in a steady, emotionless font. Go to the village of Al-Ghamama, the cloud/mist, before it is completely erased. No location, no coordinates, no traceable sender name. Just an existential command. If it had been about any other story, I might have ignored it. But the word that struck me to the core was erased. An entire village vanishing. I immediately started my search. Al-Ghamama village. No record of it in the state archives. No mention in ancient endowment registers. I searched NASA's satellite maps, referencing images decades old, hoping to find any gray spot that matched a name like that, but nothing. It was as if the name had just been born from nothing, or it had already been erased before the message reached me. But my curiosity, that fierce internal dog that feeds on the unknown, was always stronger than my fear. My eyes tracked that single line as if it were a prophecy. What force could be capable of erasing a village? And what did it mean that Al-Ghamama would be erased? And so, the next morning, after a sleepless night spent in mental analysis and tension, I prepared my gear. My old lens, my reliable Canon camera, and a small bag with water supplies and some canned food that I set off in my small car, which was closer to a resilient relic. The sky was perfectly clear when I left the city, but the further east I drove, towards the edges of the map I had drawn based on old guesses, the atmosphere began to change. It was not just morning fog. The clouds were gathering and lowering, as if they had descended to swallow the earth and cover it with a thick blanket of gray wool. The pine trees on both sides of the road gradually disappeared, absorbed by the white color. Then what truly concerned me began to happen. The phone signals vanished, not intermittently, but decisively and abruptly, as if a circuit breaker had been flipped. I tried to restart Google Maps, but the screen froze at the last point I was at, and a silent error message appeared. Destination unavailable. No, it was not just a network loss. The map itself was refusing to update. I was now driving based on a crazy guess, in the middle of a blinding mist that concealed any landmark. I began to feel the cold creep in, not a coldness in the air, but a coldness in the soul that I continued driving for an hour, 2 hours. Time had no meaning in this fog anymore. The car was slowly crawling on a road that had turned from asphalt to crumbling dirt. And at the moment I was about to turn around and decide the story was just a silly hoax, a signpost appeared on the side of the dirt road that IT was neither a modern nor an official sign. It was an old wooden piece, tilted and half-eaten by decay, as if desperately trying to fall. Written on it in faded but clear enough script was a decisive arrow pointing right. Al-Ghamama, the cloud/mist, $\_$. I stopped. I parked the car right across from the sign and got out. The sound of my footsteps on the gravel was annoyingly loud, breaking a heavy silence. I looked at the village name. The ink used looked suspiciously old, but the sign was there. That's when I understood. I had reached a place beyond the will of maps, a place protected by mist and silence that I turned the car into the path the sign indicated. 5 minutes of slow driving was enough for a cluster of houses to appear before me. The village was eerily still. There was none of the usual countryside noise. No dogs barking at a stranger, no sounds of chickens or sheep, not even human murmur. Just an absolute stillness that made you feel your ears were about to burst. The houses were cracked, the windows broken, the wood decaying. The scene suggested an abandoned village untouched for decades that I left the car and took my camera. I approached closer. Dust covered everything. I started taking photos, but my hand was unsteady. It was not a fear of anything tangible, but of this existential void. But what caught my eye and forced me to a complete stop was that some of the houses, despite all the signs of decay, were lit from within. Not by a bright electric light, but by a faint amber glow, like an old lantern or a flickering candle. These lights pulsed with a secret life in the heart of this ruin that I began my desperate attempt to communicate. I knocked on the first door, a swollen block of wood. No one opened. Then the second house, no response. Every knock sound returned to me with a dead echo. Re-establishing the silence, the third house, I stopped. I didn't hear a sound of knocking, but I heard something else. A faint sound like breathing behind the wooden door. Heavy, slow breathing, like the breath of a being that has been asleep for a long time. I raised my voice softly, trying to sound unthreatening. Is anyone here? I am a journalist, a photographer. I am looking for a story. The sound stopped completely. This sudden stillness was more terrifying than the breathing itself. Then, after a long moment during which I felt my soul was about to leave my body, a hoarse old voice whispered from inside. It was a voice rough as sandpaper, as if its owner had not spoken for years. Go back before the sun sets. If it sets, it will not rise. And everything stopped after that. No breathing, no movement, no whisper. A silence deeper than the silence of graves that I looked around in panic, my eyes darting between the lit and abandoned houses. And then, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. All the windows in the village were closed from the inside, but behind the dirty, distorted glass, a shadow was standing, a shadow watching me. It was not one shadow. There was a shadow in the fourth house, and another in the fifth. All of them standing silent, their eyes, or whatever represented them, fixed on me. I had fallen into Al-Ghamama, and there were people waiting for the sunset. The shadow and the inevitable end. The shadow. It was not just a reflection in glass. It was a silent entity sucking the light out from around it. The faint lights emanating from inside the cracked houses were betraying their occupants. Every light was casting a dark footprint on the dim glass. I felt a cold prickle strike my spine. I was not dealing with an abandoned village returning to life, but with a silent play being staged just for me. Everyone was watching me. They were all waiting. I retreated one step, then another, then sprinted toward my car. The old man's final call echoed in my ears. Go back before the sun sets. But I was no longer searching for a story. I was searching for survival. I reached the car, my hand trembling as I grasped the door handle. I jumped behind the wheel and violently turned the key. The engine let out a weak sound, a sputtering cough, then silence. I tried again, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The only remaining sound was a cold clicking from beneath the hood. I felt cold despair wash over me, harsher than the cold of Al-Ghamama. I leapt out of the car, kneeling beside the front tire. At first, I thought it was a mechanical issue, but I found the answer to be simpler and far more sinister. The battery cable was cleanly cut. It wasn't yanked out or corroded, but severed with a sharp instrument. In that moment, the fear of the unknown morphed into the certainty of being trapped. I was no longer an unwelcome guest. I had become hunted prey. Who cut the cable? When? Was it the first shadow I saw, or the old man who whispered to me from behind the door? There was no more time for answers. The sky was changing. I looked up, where the solar disk had turned into a faint orange spot struggling to penetrate the thick, low-hanging clouds. The sun was setting fast here, as if hurrying to escape this place. I had perhaps 1 hour left. I returned to the center of the village, but this time I moved with cautious steps, with the slowness of a photographer studying his victims. I had to find a key to escape, or at least a place to hide. In the middle of the village, there was what could have been a central square. Here, the houses were more dilapidated, and the effect of time on them was clearer. I entered a hut that had no door at all, just a black opening. The inside was cold, and the smell of dampness and mold filled the air. I looked up and saw something I hadn't seen outside: old footprints on the dirt floor. Small prints, like children's feet or small-sized ancient shoes. This village wasn't abandoned, it was frozen. But the sound, that absolute silence, was now beginning to break. It wasn't a loud sound, but the sound of the mist itself. A faint, continuous humming, resembling a very slow pulse, or a low-frequency resonance that the ear doesn't hear so much as the sternum feels. This sound intensified as the sun approached its setting. I followed the source of the lights. The fourth house was the most brightly lit. I tried to look through the window, but the glass was thick and coated with mud and dust. I remembered the shadow I saw watching me specifically from this window. "Who are you?" I whispered hoarsely, addressing the outer wall. "Who are you, and what awaits me at sunset?" There was no reply, but the faint hum grew stronger. I began to feel dizzy, as if the air pressure were suddenly changing. I headed back to the house where the old man's voice came from. This time, I didn't knock. I pushed the wooden door with my shoulder. It wasn't locked, but secured from the inside with old weights. After several attempts, the door burst open with a sharp, painful screech, like a scream released after long suppression. The interior was completely dark, save for a small window overlooking the accelerating sunset scene. The air was suffocating, and a strange, sharp, and bitter smell filled my nose. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to locate him in the darkness. From the corner of the room, I heard a different sound this time. Not a whisper, but a deep sigh. Then the old man appeared. He wasn't wearing traditional village clothes, but a dark wool vest, his face filled with wrinkles that looked like a map of ancient times. He was sitting on a dilapidated wooden chair. "You didn't leave, photographer," the old man said in his hoarse voice. "I told you, go back before it sets." "Why?" I asked, involuntarily pointing my camera toward him, as if the lens were my only weapon. "Who are you, and who are these people watching me?" The old man offered a cold, weary smile, as if it hadn't known happiness for hundreds of years. "Them? They are waiting for Al-Ghamama to call. And Al-Ghamama calls at sunset." "What is Al-Ghamama?" "This is not just mist." The old man looked at me deeply, as if I were a naive child. "Al-Ghamama is not mist, Salim. It is the separator. It is the thin curtain between what is visible and what is unseen, between this world and the world before it. And we are the guardians. We try to keep the curtain closed." I froze in place. "Guardians of whom? And who are the shadows?" "The shadows?" He shook his head slowly. "They are those who failed to escape. Their souls remained here, trapped in hollow bodies, no longer capable of movement or speech. Only observation and waiting." He pointed his thin finger toward the window whose color was beginning to change to deep crimson. "When the sun sets, the curtain weakens. And when it weakens, the exchange begins. An exchange between us and them. They want a new world. They want to return. And you, Salim, you carry the scent of the new world. You are a key for them to cross." At this moment, I no longer heard a hum, but I heard something like a collective whisper, as if hundreds of voices were trying to express themselves at once, but only had the power of a whisper. This sound began to come from outside the house, from every corner of the village. I looked at my watch. Only 15 minutes remained until total sunset. The room began to feel heavy. I felt the cold invade me from the inside. "I need to get out of here. Help me," I pleaded with the old man. At this moment, I no longer heard a hum, but I heard something like a collective whisper, as if hundreds of voices were trying to express themselves at once, but only had the power of a whisper. This sound began to come from outside the house, from every corner of the village. I looked at my watch. Only 15 minutes remained until total sunset. The room began to feel heavy. I felt the cold invade me from the inside. I need to get out of here. Help me, I pleaded with the old man, the other face of Al-Ghamama. The collective whisper turned into a silent scream. It was not a human cry that the ear could register as words, but a spiritual sound, a violent vibration that struck the chest wall and echoed in the skull. It was like air rushing through thousands of empty windpipes. The old man in front of me completely collapsed in his chair, his facial features turning into something rigid, like a mask of wax. "It has begun," his lips muttered with extreme difficulty. I looked at the window and witnessed the moment the sun completely vanished behind the horizon blanketed by the black mist. Absolute darkness descended with unprecedented intensity. In that second, the faint lights in every house in the village went out all at once. Complete darkness reigned. But this darkness was not the end of sight. It was the beginning of something else. The black mist outside began to move. It was no longer hanging. It was surging with furious speed between the crumbling houses, like a dense current of water. I felt as though Al-Ghamama itself had become a living entity, a neural network seeking to absorb any remaining light. "Now it will call." I heard the old man's last whisper before he went completely silent, as if the hands of his life clock had stopped at that word. I left the old man and backed away toward the door. There was no time to flee the village. The mist was enveloping everything. I had to hide or find some weapon. I remembered I was a journalist, not a fighter. My only weapon was my camera. I rushed out, the mist slapping my face. The bitter smell grew stronger, like the scent of cold ozone or burnt old metal. The houses around me seemed to be moving in the darkness. Then I saw them. The shadows. They emerged from the broken windows and doors. They were not walking, they were floating. They were not clear human shapes, but black, slender figures, like dense smoke taking the shape of an elongated person. They were moving toward the center, toward where I stood. The collective whisper surged again. I felt a tremendous force pulling me towards them, like a spiritual magnetism drawing my soul from my body. They wanted me. The old man was right. I was the key to their crossing. I realized that attempting to run on foot was a death sentence. I must find a weakness in this entangled entity. Al-Ghamama is the curtain, and the shadows are the trapped souls. What could tear a curtain like this? A crazy idea flashed in my mind, drawn from the philosophy of my work. I document what people are afraid to mention. Documentation is the opposite of concealment. I pulled my Canon camera from my bag. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I set it to the highest power flash setting and raised it toward the shadows, which were now approaching me with terrifying slowness. The shadows were about 10 meters away. Their whispering was deafening. They seemed to be thinking as a collective, one movement, one goal. With a trembling voice, I whispered to myself, "If maps do not want to know this place, perhaps the blaring light is what they cannot bear." One press of the shutter button. Flash! A brilliant, sharp white light exploded in the heart of the mist. The power of the flash was immense in this absolute darkness. What I hadn't expected happened. The shadows did not flee, they froze in place. The mist around them began to recede slightly, recoiling as if lashed. I heard a sharp sound resembling the rustling of torn paper. This encouraged me. It was working. It was a way to document them, to impose my presence and the presence of light upon their non-existence. I pressed again. Flash! The shadows in the front row drew back violently, their forms shaking. The photography was tearing at their coherence. They tried to shield themselves, moving very slowly, as if trying to escape the illumination. But the shadows were numerous, and from everywhere. After the third flash, I realized that the flash was only buying me time. I would not be able to defeat them with light. I turned and ran, this time not towards the broken car, but toward the tilted wooden sign. I had to reach the exit dirt road. I was running with the camera in my hand, randomly firing flashes behind my back to keep the shadows at a safe distance. Every flash seemed like a sonic bomb exploding in this terrifying silence. I reached my car. I did not have time to fix the cable. All I did was pull a thick piece of cloth from the back seat, cover my head and knees with it, and began to crawl frantically along the muddy dirt road toward where the sign was supposed to be. The shadows did not pursue me with human speed. Their pursuit was slow, horrifying, as if they were confident that the prey would never escape. But the flashes were draining my energy, making me crawl, seeing the world for a moment, and then plunging into darkness again. I reached the tilted sign. I passed it with difficulty. The mist was trying to swallow me. I felt the dampness penetrate the cloth covering my face, and my hot breath began to suffocate me. At that moment, I raised the camera for the last time, pointing the lens toward Al-Ghamama. It was not a defense, but a final decision to document. I took the picture. Flash! In the blinding white light, I saw the final scene. Al-Ghamama was not just mist, but intertwined faces of thousands of shadows, a network of desperate visages forming and dissolving together, as if they were one body trying to breathe. A mysterious force pushed me, and I fell outward, sliding down a muddy slope. I tumbled away from the road, and then my body went silent. When I regained consciousness, there was something different. The air was not clear, there was still mist, but it was ordinary mist. The cold morning fog that evaporates with the first rays of sun. The light, the natural light, was returning. I looked around. I saw only ordinary pine trees. The wooden sign had vanished. The dirt road had turned into an ordinary dirt road. Al-Ghamama village was completely erased. I stood up with difficulty. I was covered in mud and scars, but I was alive. I walked for an hour until I reached an old asphalt road and managed to flag down a passing car. I returned to the city, to my office. The story no longer mattered to anyone. No physical evidence, no registered existence of the village. Just madness in my head. I placed the camera on the desk, my hands trembling. I didn't have the courage to open it. The camera remained there for weeks, a silent witness to what happened. Finally, I opened it. I scrolled through the pictures. Everything before the sign was intact and clear. Everything after it was absolute white. Al-Ghamama did not permit the existence of physical evidence. But on the last picture, the one I took as I crawled, it wasn't completely white. It was an extremely blurry photo, but in the center there was a sharp, clear black spot, resembling a wide pupil of an eye. And even though Google Maps never knew Al-Ghamama village existed, I knew that the maps were not wrong. There are places maps do not know, because they do not want to know them. But they certainly know who visited them. And here I am, Salim, the photographer of forgotten stories, now living on the margin, watching the morning mist with eyes that know what lies behind it, and I know that I am now the shadow watching the world.